Welcome, everybody. My name is Jill Jonathan, and I'm with Red Wine and Blue. We're a community of women who use digital media and friend to friend organizing to change the world one suburb at a time. And one way we're working to do that is to have conversations because we need to talk about so many things. And so today is part of our conversation with authors who have had their books removed from shelves because we're all learning about book bans. It's quite the thing lately. So we really wanted to talk to the authors to find out how it is affecting them and how we can support them. Dashka, am I pronouncing your first name correctly?
You absolutely are.
Okay, good. We are so incredibly grateful to have you join us. Joe and I have been talking about your book for the last couple of days, the 57 Bus. And we are incredibly interested in the story. And we're also like, why in the world would anybody ban this? I mean, it's a true story. Like, I don't understand. You can't ban truth, can you? So let's just start with that. So just tell us a little bit about this book and why some people are having an issue with it.
Yeah, so the book is the 57 Bus. It's a true story about two teenagers on either side of a high-profile crime that took place in my town where I live, Oakland, California, and in which an agender, not male, not female teen was coming home from school and fell asleep on the bus, and another teenager from a different school set their skirt on fire. The skirt erupted in a big ball of flame, and the first teenager, whose name is Sasha, was very badly burned and taken by ambulance to San Francisco Burn Center, where they spent several weeks in the hospital undergoing multiple surgeries for second and third degree burns running from calf to thigh. The other teenager, Richard, was arrested at school the following day and charged with 2 serious felonies, both with hate crime enhancements. That meant that if convicted, he could spend the rest of his life in prison. And so the book follows both kids, what led them to that moment on the bus, what happened on the bus, and then what happened afterwards, and asks questions about race and gender and justice. And as you say, it's all true. I originally reported it for the New York Times Magazine. It's obviously age appropriate. The kids involved were 16 and 18 years old, going through all the regular teen stuff. And why would anybody ban it? Well, I mentioned that it talks about race, gender, and justice. And these are topics that make some people uncomfortable. And unfortunately, there is a movement in this country to never feel or encounter anything that makes them experience discomfort. And not only that, but to prevent anybody else from having those experiences either. The book has no sex in it, but it is often described as obscene, which is hilarious. There's some ballroom dancing, literally. Sasha is interested, and they're in a relationship with another non-binary person. They're both into ballroom dancing. They go and have a night of doing that. That's like the most sexy thing that happens in the entire book, is some dancing.
When did you first become aware of the fact that the book was being challenged?
So I first started, I get Google alerts for all my books that tell me when there's somebody talking about it. And it used to be that those were because there was a community-wide read or a teen book club or a review or something like that. And then I started to get alerts saying that the book had been challenged. And, you know, I think some of the first ones were Kansas and Rhode Island. And I have to say that, you know, I had always wondered how I would feel if one of my books was banned. And, you know, there's a sort of a thing around authors used to say, like, oh, it's such good publicity. And then, you know, all of that turns out not to be true. And I ended up discovering that I just felt sad, just so sad that this book that was a labor of love, and something that I have been overjoyed to share with people and to be part of these very interesting and lovely conversations that the book sparks, that all that was being shut down. I had no idea, however, what was coming. You know, I thought those were a couple of isolated incidents.
And now look where we are.
And now
I mean,
look where we are.
It's just, and I mean, you've been a writer for years. Like, have you seen anything quite like what we're seeing here in this year of 2023 with books being challenged?
And no, there's literally nothing like it. The numbers just keep going up and the reasons keep getting more and more absurd. And so, you know, and the topics, these state laws that say, well, we can't discuss this and we can't discuss that, and we don't want anybody to feel bad, you know, which I just feel like, well, if you don't ever feel bad, how are you ever going to learn anything?
Right.
You know, there's lots of things that make a person sad in, you know, about in history and in literature. You know, I bawled my eyes out when I watched King Lear. And I, you know, like, so, but I guess that's not okay, because we don't ever want anybody to have uncomfortable feelings.
Yeah. Oh, good. Yeah, go ahead.
You said, sorry, go ahead. You mentioned the conversation sparked by this book, and I think that's such a fascinating question to ask you, because there's so many different conversations that can stem from this book. I mean, gender identity, race, justice, equity, you know, all of it. Like, these are conversations that clearly that people don't want our teens to be having, which speaks to a larger issue, right? Like, talk a little bit about the kinds of conversations that would stem
you know,
from
there's
this
a
book,
lot of
or that
different things to talk about in the book. And I'm a journalist. I don't want to give people answers. I don't have answers. I just have lots and lots of questions. And when I decided to write a book on this topic for teens, my motivation was that I thought they would be really interested in the questions that the story poses about gender identity, but also about race, and particularly about what justice is. And what do you do when you have a teenager commit a terrible act? What is the correct response to that? And why do we have a juvenile justice system that is different than the system we have for adults? And what kinds of thinking goes into trying to decide what a just response is? And so the letters I get from kids are amazing. I'm also from teachers. I'm also from parents about conversations that they've had. And teachers always say, I've had the most amazing discussions that I've ever had in my classroom, because kids are really interested in ethics, really, and just how do we create a just response to something. And there's many layers to look at in this story, because Richard had also been the victim of a crime. And Richard had a lot going on, had suffered a lot of trauma in his life. And so the more you know about him, the more, you know, the less clear the story becomes. And yet at the same time, you're learning lots about Sasha and why Sasha had come to the conclusion that they were non-binary. And so, you know, for many people who are unfamiliar or hostile to that idea, there's, you know, lots of discussions about, well, how do you know what gender you are? You know, what is gender and how does it differ from biological sex? And all of these questions that, you know, it's in our world, whatever, you know, you can have whatever pre-existing ideas you want to have, but these are people and concepts that kids live, encounter, experience. And so, you know, to not talk about them, I think, is to do our kids a huge disservice.
Yeah, Absolutely. And like, I feel like curiosity leads to understanding. So, like, I love how you're saying, you're like, I don't have all the answers, but I have a lot of questions. So it opens up that conversation. And Joe and I are parents. She's got two kids that are what, 10 and 13. I've got 13, 11-year olds. So we've got kids these ages where I know we both agree where we want to foster that curiosity in our kids. We don't want them to see the world as black and white and just be open to other ideas. And I just feel like that's what you're doing in this writing and so many other authors. And that's why at Red Wine and Blue, we are pushing back on it because we're like, this isn't what we want for our kids.
And I think that that's so important because absolutely there are more of us, a lot more of us than there are of them. But the book banners have been very loud and very aggressive. And I think, 2 years ago, most of us just assumed that we live in a democracy. We have constitutional rights to freedom of speech, freedom of thought, intellectual freedom, and we would not have to be going to school board meetings and state houses to defend those rights. We kind of thought they were guaranteed.
Yeah.
And so this is a tough time because we're discovering that no, we have to rebuild this democracy every day. And that's part of our job as citizens, but also as parents, because we do want to have kids who are equipped for the modern world and who know how to navigate diverse spaces and know how to feel affirmed in who they are and feel connected and supported in the spaces that they're walking through.
Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting that you said that. I really, I think we take so much for granted, have taken so much for granted. We've seen our rights being stripped away. It seems like it's increasing faster and faster. And it really does remind us that this is work, that we have to work towards the democracy that we want. And that for our kids, we cannot and should not try to insulate them from what the real world looks like, what they're going to be encountering as they leave, their teen years and start entering the world is in the pages of books like yours. And any effort to try and shield them from that is, to your point, doing them a great disservice. For instance, just the irony that Sasha was able to find herself sort of in the pages of a comic book, and that was sort of the first introduction they had to being non-binary. And kind of an interesting parallel that's what could for other people could be done in the pages of the book that they
I
might
hadn't thought about that particular parallel, but that's very true. And Sasha, even at 16, 17, 18, was this very questing person who was so curious and interested in trying to learn about the world and then apply those lessons to themselves, and figure out like where they stood, all the different kinds of people that there are to be. Who am I going to be? And that seems to be kind of a universal question for young people is, who am I going to be in the world? And we want to give them all the tools to figure that out and hopefully to be good people, to be, kind and compassionate and upstanding and participatory in this work of making a democracy and a just and equitable society.
Yeah, exactly. And so what are some ways that people can support authors like you and your work to make sure that it's being shared with kids and making sure that it's being kept in schools and in libraries?
Yeah, so great question. Of course I want to say buy my book, but
that makes sense.
But really the answer is to show up at your local meetings and vote. So many people vote at the top of the ballot and then they're not really voting down at the bottom where those local school board races are, library board races, and state representatives are. And So, and it's tough now because we've lost a lot of local press. And so being informed is much more of a task. But there are still, the League of Women Voters, there are still local groups who are working on these issues. So vote in those elections and then show up at your school board meetings to voice your support for the freedom to read, and call your representatives, etc. There are two other things that I think anybody can do wherever they live, and that is just to send a letter to your school district, your school superintendent, or the principal of your school, to say, I support the freedom to read. I just want to know what you are doing to protect the right to read at my school and or at the schools in my district. You don't have to be a parent. Certainly, if you are a parent, speak up. But because they need to have that pressure applied before there is a problem. They need to know that they have parents and community members who care about books and the freedom to read before somebody loses their mind and starts yelling and screaming about pornography in the schools. Because at that moment, that's when people get reactive and frightened. And so you want to kind of give them the tools and the knowledge that this is, this might be coming, and your community does not want you to jump just because one parent has raised an objection.
I love that idea of being proactive instead of reactive. And I think that's what we're trying to do at Red, Wine, and Blue with our campaign, Freedom to Parent. We're kind of being proactive. And Jo, she did a great video about some ways that people are being proactive, I think in New Jersey and maybe another state, Jo, where they were trying to protect the right to read, right?
I mean, to your point, Dashka, this is happening. I'm sorry, they're doing the roof next door.
Yeah, I can't hear it.
Sorry. Okay, cool. That's all I can hear. But yeah, so it actually happened to a Becky Albertalli book in a town very close to where I grew up in New Jersey, which actually shocked me. But that's the thing, when even though you think you're paying attention and you think not here, this wouldn't happen here, this is only going to happen in those deeply red states. It happens here. It can happen anywhere. And being proactive, the state of New Jersey has just introduced legislation that very much looks like legislation introduced in Illinois that would ban book bans. That any public library or school library that doesn't follow the Librarian's Bill of Rights would be fined or denied state funding. And I love the idea that we're not powerless. I mean, yes, these are two blue states. Yes, it's true, but book bans are still happening here. And it's possible, to get ahead of it, but being proactive, I love that you said that. It is absolutely crucial, because once you're on the defense and you've ceded all that ground, and the loud, angry voices can come in and they can fearmonger and scare and use big buzzwords that are boogeymen, then you're playing defense, and that's not, an advantageous place to be. But I definitely think that we can, go on the offense here. There are more of us.
Yeah,
there's definitely more of us than there are of them.
That there's a lot of soft censorship that's happening. School Library Journal did a survey of librarians nationwide, and 97% of them said that they had considered the potential for controversy when deciding whether to acquire a book. And so that means that, if people are doing the censorship work themselves, not acquiring the book, not shelving the book, taking the book off the shelf without there being any challenge to it, that makes life very easy for the book banners. And so that's why, being loud about, we want diverse books on our shelves. We want to have our kids have access to all kinds of books representing all points of view. We know as parents that if there's something we have an issue with, we will deal with that in our own households. That those are things that librarians, administrators, teachers all need to hear, so that they can have the courage to do their jobs without living in fear of something, of getting attacked, of losing their jobs, of having somebody follow them home, all these things that are happening to people.
And it's really important also to have these conversations where we're able to take away the sort of lies that are being told, particularly about, in your case, about this being there's sexual content in the book, and then that's sort of what they're using as their justification in trying to ban it. But the conversations like this sort of dispel what they're saying. That's important too, because that is our greatest weapon in this fight, is the truth, right? Facts. That's on our side. And as long as we keep a hold of those,
and
we do
the
have
other
the
thing
advantage.
is that I think it's important that parents who support this stuff reclaim the parental rights conversation. Because I get so many letters from parents saying that a child gave the parent my book in order to open up a conversation, or a parent read my book because their child was reading it and they wanted to know more about it. And then some amazing conversations happened. A high school student in Southern California was quoted in the LA Times saying, my whole family changed because of this book. And to me, those are family values. Those are my family values anyway, which is that parents and children are talking together about things that are important to them and having those discussions about things that might not come up any other way. And every parent deserves the right to have a meaningful conversation with their kid. That's what we live for, right?
Seriously, I love how you say, like, those are my family values. Yeah, and that's true for me too. And I would think Joe as well. It's like having those conversations with our kids, and I don't want them to grow up to be so isolated. And like, I was having a conversation, my daughter just finished the 8th grade, and she's home, for the summer. And she was like, "Oh, what are you working on today?" And I was telling her about you and your book. And she said, "Oh, I know that book. That was in my 8th grade classroom." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's amazing." So I will definitely be buying that so we can read it, both read it. I want to read it and have her read it and have that conversation. But I thought that was cool that she recognized what it was. But also, where was I going with this? I just thought that was cool. But it's like, I want to be able, I was telling her, she said, "Why would anybody ban that book?" And I was like, well, I don't fully understand it, but it's a true story. And some people, I think, are scared of the truth. But the thing is, you have to talk about the truth. You have to talk about things that have happened, because that's how you can grow and get better. And that's how you can keep things from happening again. So we just kind of had this conversation of like how you had to be open with things and you can't turn away from it. So I thought that we already are having a conversation. And we haven't read it yet.
Are happening already.
And I like that you were mentioning this idea of reclaiming the parents' rights, right? So we talk a lot about that at Red, Wine, and Blue. We have the Freedom to Parent campaign. It's central to what we're doing right now, because we agree with you 100%. They've co-opted those words, that terminology, but what they really mean is that they want to determine what rights as parents we have. And we want the freedom to be able to parent our kids in the 21st century in a world that's reflective of what's actually out there. And we would rather not restrict access for all kids, but open up access for all kids. And I love these conversations so much, because it is so endlessly exhausting to hear them use those terms while they're taking books off the shelves and using the umbrella of protecting our kids, when it's completely converse from reality. It couldn't be more inside out.
And also, there's this
right?
real conflation of, they talk about kids as if a 5-year-old and a 17-year-old is the same. My book does not belong in a 3rd grade classroom. The reading level is above what they are capable of reading, and the topics are beyond the understanding of most 3rd graders. And so, sure, we don't want every book in every classroom, but these things are absolutely appropriate for middle and high schoolers. And that's why we have librarians and teachers who have the expertise to make those decisions.
That's what I was just thinking. I'm like,
Exactly.
when do we stop trusting the experts, the people who, you know, have dedicated their careers to this?
Yeah. Yeah.
I just don't get that.
Yeah. And I just wanted to add one thing too. I've been thinking about it too, because there's so many opportunities for conversations in the pages of this book. And what parent doesn't want, look, we all know, you ask your kid when they come home, they're teen, and you're like, how was your day?
Yeah.
Fine. What'd you do? Nothing. What'd you learn? I don't know. But they get their hands on a good book that makes them think and isn't like, oh, force feeding them what their opinion should be. There's so many opportunities here for a young person to navigate what answers they think. And then if they want to engage in a conversation, if my son wants to talk about this book with me, it's like, as a mom of a teenage son,
a huge win.
kind of a
I feel
win.
the same way. You know, my son is now a young adult and he's pretty good at conversations, but in the teen years, yes, it's like extracting teeth to try and get information, but you hit upon a topic that's interesting to them. And then you get to sort of hash out these questions of, you know, well, how do you feel about that? What would you do in that situation? You know, here's something I didn't know. And my son was actually sort of a consultant. I call him my pop culture and slang consultant, particularly because he, you know, grew up in Oakland and went to Oakland schools. He was very important for getting the Oakland slang right. And he has that role in my next book, which is about social media. And so, you know, those kinds of things where I could say, okay, I don't understand this. Can you explain it to me? And find out that, you know, there's a whole world that teenagers are living that most parents don't really have access to unless they are willing to offer it up. And books can be a way into that world and that conversation.
I love that. And you know, just the idea, just talking about parenting, like assuming that we know better, it's not always true. And, you know, like I look at my kids as two individual humans separate from me and two humans that I can learn from. And so I think like opening up that conversation, like we can learn from our kids, and why wouldn't we want to? I feel like I'm a lifelong learner. Like I always want to grow. It just makes life more interesting.
Well, and also that they are already being exposed to these ideas and issues without any mediation or help from us. Yep. And so, you know, what we want is to give them the tools to be able to think more clearly and with more information about stuff that they're getting, you know, in the cafeteria and on social media and all these other places where we don't have an entree. And so, you know, this is, again, for me, the family values is that you have a container in which tough topics can be discussed so that you have the opportunity to try and sort through with them their thoughts and feelings and give them additional information that they might not be getting, you know, from, you know, the person who's sat next to them in class and, you know, whatever they heard, you know, in a, you know, text conversation or whatever, you know. So that's certainly true. My next book is, as I said, is about social media. And, you know, there's tons of stuff that I learned when I was researching this. It's another sort of high profile story involving two teenagers. It's called Accountable, out in August. And
I was just going to ask, I'm like, is that out yet? Sounds interesting.
August. And, you know, there's a whole sort of social media world that, as I was interviewing teenagers about the incident that the book covers, I just had no idea what they were exposed to, what they were seeing online. And I can guarantee that their parents had no idea either. And so, you know, those are the kinds of things that a book that a family is reading, you know, they get more information than they're getting online, more context for what they're seeing. And also, hopefully, parents and educators are getting that context and that information as well.
Right. It's like this safe place to explore the world to navigate, you know, these really complicated things that they are discovering, they're going to discover, they're going to be faced with. And if we try to block them from being exposed to these things, as we all know, if you tell your kid not to do something, it's going to make them 10 times more likely to want to do it. So if we tell them they can't read something, they can't know something, they're going to find it. They're going to go outside.
And I would much rather that any student learn something from a book that's in the library than from a Google search where you have no idea what the accuracy of whatever they click on. And, you know, those first 5 hits may have an agenda of their own. And so, you know, the idea that kids are not going to be exposed to this information if we take the book out of the library, not true. It means, it just means that we have less ability to curate the information and make sure that it's accurate.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So this has been an incredible conversation. And I'm really, before we wrap up, I just want to hear a little bit more about the book you're working on, Accountable, because that sounds very interesting and very timely. What was the motivation of you working on that one?
So I was actually signing books when 57 Bus wasn't even out yet. This is in 2017, and I was signing advance copies when somebody in the signing line asked me if I had heard about the discovery of a racist Instagram account at a local high school. And I had not heard about it. It had just happened, but I was instantly intrigued because it seemed sort of similar to the 57 Bus in that it was something horrifying that young people from good families, you know, who should have known better had done. And I wanted to understand why. And so that led me on a 4-year reporting journey in which I ended up having the participation of both the account targeted Black girls at the high school. And so the girls who had been targeted participated, and the boys who had created or followed the account also participated. And so the book is a multi-perspective telling about, again, what led up to the creation of this account and then what happened after it was discovered, and asks all these questions about the power of social media, what kids are seeing online, what the impacts of this kind of cyberbullying, online shaming is, how do you respond when teenagers do something that is, it feels like a punch in the gut, and you know what is the correct response, and then what are the more typical responses, not necessarily the same thing. You know, and I hope will lead to lots of conversations with, you know, between kids and teachers, amongst teachers and educators, amongst parents, between, you know, inside families, about social media, and also about race and racism and bullying and justice, and how you respond when there's been an injury, not only to people, but to an entire community, because this whole school and town was really torn apart by the discovery of this incident.
Wow.
That sounds incredible. We should expect it to be banned in some states because of what it deals with. But as a mom of a preteen and a teenager, social media is inescapable, as we all know, for these kids. And it's like, they live and breathe it. And we have to talk about it. And all of these questions are so important. I know I'm going to be reading it, and I'm going to be asking my kids to read it. So I am so excited for this book to come out in August.
People who want to know more, just if you follow me on Instagram, I will be talking about it endlessly.
Awesome. And is there a place, I mean, I know Amazon, you can pre-order it, but is there a preferred bookshop that you like to get your books from, or that you recommend people to pre-order it from?
Bookshop.org, I think, is a great alternative to Amazon because it supports local independent bookstores. And and it is just as easy to use as Amazon, which I will always love to walk into a local bookstore and buy from an actual store, but sometimes when I hear about something and I just need to get it right away, bookshop.org is where I go.
That's cool. And Red Wine and Blue, we have our own bookshop. If you go to redwine.blue, it's part of bookshop.org. And we're going to put the 57 bus on there. I don't know if it's on yet, but we'll get that up on there so you can order directly from that. Yeah, and we'll look out for this new book. Oh my gosh, Dashka, thank you so much. This has been such a great conversation. I feel like I definitely, like, I always tell people, like, authors, we're like, you are a friend of Red Wine and Blue. Please keep in touch and let us know how we can support you and share your work, because it's incredible.
Well, ditto. I was so excited when I saw your first TikTok video, and I was like, oh, this is what I've been waiting for. This is the most important thing, is to have folks start to push back and reclaim the debate and reclaim this space that we know is ours as Americans. We get to make choices for ourselves. And so thank you so much for doing this work. And I am here to support you in whatever way I can.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I'll save this conversation so it can be rewatched on Instagram. And then we usually put them up on YouTube, too. So it will be accessible. Thanks again. We'll be in touch for sure. And everybody check out redwine.blue, see the work that we're doing, because we're not having it. We're not having it. So, all right. Bye, everybody.